All right, this might be my favorite part of the webcast this time. Joined by Max Gagliardi. Max is the Chief Commercial Officer of AEGIS Physical. How you doing, Max?
Great, Matt. I'm glad to be on. Excited about it.
Hey, well, having you in the team is just such a great addition because there's new things that we can talk about. It's not just about future prices; it's about boots on the ground. How do producers interact with their midstream with their pipeline? And so, if anybody has any questions about how to negotiate new pipe agreements, new midstream agreements, how to make sure you're getting paid for what you're owed per your contracts, or anything in between in gas, oil, scheduling, trading, that's Max.
Well, thanks for the intro. And there's a bunch that we could dive into. I know we've got a limited amount of time, but there's some topical things we can hit on. There's some strategy stuff as well. So I'll kind of let you take it the way you want to take it and lead me off here, and then we'll see what all we can fit in.
Oh yeah, I got one. So just fresh off of what Jay was talking about with new infrastructure build outs in the Permian, taking gas away from Waha, definitely some changes in the market that are gonna happen there. But if you think about that, that gas has to come from somewhere. It might be infill, or it might be things on the periphery of the Permian Basin that are adding new gas. How do you advise those two broad categories of producers in how to approach midstream?
I mean, I think you're asking one of the more loaded questions in the oil and gas physical space, which is basically what is the capacity? And people ask us that a lot, and it's kind of like, well, what are we talking about here? Everybody likes to put a lot of focus, and rightfully so, on the macro level kind of basin takeaway, whether that's new large scale infrastructure pipes getting put in, new oil terminals or hubs or pipelines that are going in. But oftentimes you got to get it to that sales point before you can actually sell it into the market. And so what we like to do first is kind of start near the wellhead. And when you look at what a client's tip or a customer's currently producing, and then you look at their future development plans, as well as factor in kind of what's going on around them in that area of the basin. And so, there's been some areas of the Permian recently where treating has been a big issue. So you're looking at gas with H2S in it. And these are typically longer lead time, higher capex facilities projects. You got to have an acid gas injection well. You've got to, create a treating plant. And so things like that can tend to snag folks up. And with the new regulations around flaring, and then everybody obviously being focused on environmental concerns, not wanting to flare, it's just becoming less and less palatable to be sitting here and flaring your gas, especially if you're on the New Mexico side. And so, looking at things like treating, looking at compression capacity, looking at pipeline capacity, a lot of times in these areas, it may seem like you pull up the map and it's a spaghetti bowl of pipelines, but then when you dig in, you find out that, well, there's a poly pipe that's nearby, and that goes to a booster station for compression. That compression station is almost full. Well, compression may be 12, even sometimes 24 months out when you get into these specialized builds, for example, for high H2S gas. And if you don't have clean residue gas to run that compression on, it can really extend out those lead times. And so what we're going to do is look at where they're going to drill, look at how much volume we think is going to come on. We're going to talk to the different midstream counterparties in the area, see what their existing capacity is, try to sort through that. It's like, here's what you got at the plant. Here's how much sour gas you can take. Here's how much rich gas you can take. Here's what it's looking like in the field. We don't always go and run like a full-fledged hydraulic model, but, try to get a sense from them around, okay, if I'm going to bring on X amount of million cubic feet a day from this, area that I'm going to drill, how much compression is it going to need? How much pipeline capacity will there be? And a lot of times, you get into these problems where it's not a quick lead time item. And so, this last year and going into the next 12 months, helping a few Permian producers kind of navigate a situation where you're really looking at, maybe 12 months, even 18 months out before some of these constraints get alleviated. And that can be frustrating, especially when you've got, production targets that you need to hit. You've got mandates not to flare, and so I think it just speaks to the importance of getting out ahead of this stuff. We have a lot of folks engage us when it's getting time to drill or when it's getting closer to production coming online. And I think this is a key differentiator between the hedging space and the physical space. Is that if you're a few months out, that may be a good time to start thinking about hedging, but if you're going to put a development plan together, a few months may not be enough time. And so really encourage folks as soon as they can when they're thinking about putting a line on the drill schedule to reach out and to talk about, what are the typical or what is the capacity constraints within that basin so we can start putting a plan together.
Hmm. So it sounds like differently, depending on the location, different levels of midstream build out constraints that might be idiosyncratic to that area, and you can help them on both.
I was going to say, like, it just depends. Like you mentioned, periphery versus infield. I think if it's infield, a lot of times folks, they think, okay, well, there's pipe here, there's compression in place, there's a plant nearby. That doesn't always mean that there might not be problems with incremental gas. If it's something on a step out piece of acreage, it could be the midstream. It could even be things like right of way, for example, on BLM lands or things like that. So when you're looking at something that's a step out, you're probably talking about having to lay a line. Right of way starts to come into play. You start trying to figure out what's my Gantt chart of these different phase gates that I have to go through to get this infrastructure built, and what's the realistic timeline on getting that done. I mean, at a minimum, if it's something that's going to require in excess of a mile of pipe, I would think at a minimum 4 months in advance. I mean, that's probably even cutting it a little close, quite frankly, depending on, for example, the right of way issues and things like that. 6 months is probably better if you're having to do a step out. If you're infield, you may have infrastructure there. You just want to make sure you check all the boxes and that adequate takeaway is there.
So this is why I love having you on the team and the whole Aegis Physical team, because when Jay and I typically talk about economics of prices and basis, I mean, that implies gas is flowing,
Right.
and I just love that you're able to chase that all the way back up to the wellhead. You speaking of that, that physical boots on the ground, knowing what's happening all the way to the wellhead. There's been some recent weather again in Oklahoma, West Texas, and elsewhere that's really riled production, especially or oil and gas production. If you look at this winter storm that just passed in January, what were you expecting that could go wrong, and then how did it actually play out?
Well, we always prepare for the worst, and I think that it's a testament to our team, navigating this recent winter storm, as well as Winter Storm Uri a few years back. And it's really just trying to, you're kind of a communicator. You're sort of a middleman. You're talking to the production side and, figuring out from them how much production they think they're going to be able to keep online. It's not an exact science. And a lot of times the data that they're getting from the field may not be precise either. So you kind of come up with a band of what we think we're going to be able to flow, and then working with their field folks, working with their commercial folks at the corporate office, or their, whoever's managing that, the production engineers, and really just trying to make sure that we're in constant communication. And it always seems that these things happen over the weekend, or over the weekend with a holiday. And so really our team just being kind of on call 24/7 to monitor these things as they develop. Then the other side of it is, what's the pipeline telling you? What are the midstream saying, and what's the downstream saying in terms of the takeaway pipes? And the most frustrating thing, and we run into this too, is where our producer clients are out there getting after it. They're keeping wells flowing, and then they get a notice from the midstream that, hey, we're going to do blanket cuts of 30%, 10%. I mean, I think this last storm, a lot of the pipelines came out and just said a 30% cut. So just because you have the ability to flow, you may have to curtail or pull back. A lot of guys, they were already kind of down that much or around that much anyways. One anecdotal story from a client of ours that is a really good operator. They knew that by they, I mean the midstream knew that we were representing them on the scheduling side, helping them, make sure that we're in good communication with them. They also knew that this operator performed really well during some other weather events, and everybody else got the 30% cut, but they told us, hey, for them, tell them 10% because we have confidence in their ability to flow and your ability with Aegis Physical to communicate with their scheduling group to make sure that we're all synced up. And so it's really just a game of telegraph where you're whispering something from someone else. It's trying not to get lost in translation. But just props to the team because man, it's a lot of work, but we try to navigate those situations and then make sure that even going into it, to take a step back, just looking at the mix of how we're selling it. Are we doing a lot of front-loaded first of the month pricing? Or we're going to do daily pricing, which gives us more flexibility there. And so we typically in these winter months will lean a little heavier on daily, just to make sure that we've got some room to move and just adjust the noms as we need to and not get caught.
I'm glad you mentioned some of that because we didn't state it explicitly earlier. We were talking about advisory, more planning ahead for midstream, but scheduling, trading, physical trading, and also at different levels of involvement, and also guiding producers through events like this. I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm curious what's going to happen now that we had this event. I mean, one of the things that you also do through technology and through advisory is to make sure that producers get paid what they're supposed to get paid per their midstream agreements. Anything that you're expecting that might get out of whack when these production statements start coming in for January, say during the month of March?
One thing you're going to want to focus on is the balancing language. And if there's any penalties, where you in those penalties, hopefully with our clients, they're not, but you want to make sure that if someone's going to come to you and say that you're out of the tolerance of being in balance per the agreement, that that's going to be handled correctly. I don't think we had any of those issues with this storm, but that's one thing that could flow through if there's some cash outs or things like that. The other thing is just looking at trying to help clients navigate, the main question we get is like, well, what's my price going to be for this month? We saw prices spike to $20 an M, $25 an M, maybe 30 there for a short period of time, but that's just a window. And there's a lot of variables that go into that. It's like how much production was actually did you flow and sell during that time period? How much of your production was actually priced to be able to take advantage of that via daily or first of the month? And
What
so
kind of
what's really
hedges did you have in place?
yeah, right. What kind of hedges did you have in place? What's really nice about the technology is that, anything that we are helping on the physical side with marketing and trading those volumes, we capture those trades. And so we house those in our system. That's not a standalone product yet. It's on a wish list, but for clients that are using us for physical, we have a trade capture system, and we put those trades in there. And then at the end of the month, it can generate the invoice. It can check it back to the volumes that we nommed, and then it'll give you a picture of, here's how the pricing breakdown was, and really help you dig into that weighted average sales price and figure out, okay, well, it ended up being an average of $5 for the month. Some of the month I was at $2 because prices were soft, and the storm came in and I got $25. We're averaging 5. And how do you paint that picture for your stakeholders, investors, whoever it may be, for your internal, corporate financial planning group? But really being able to track all that stuff instead of it just being kind of a black box if you were just selling to the pipeline and they just give you a price. I think that was one big issue that we ran into in the in the storm back in 2021, was that folks that were just selling to the pipeline got their purchase statements in, and they're like, I got $2 for the 250 or whatever it was for the month. And they were very confused, and like, how did they not get any of that uplift? And then it goes back to the pricing mechanisms in the contract. If you're getting priced, at inside FERC and it's on a set index, now you may not take advantage of those uplifts. And so I know some groups that either weren't having us help them do the marketing, or were just selling to the pipe, and they were very disappointed because they had field people out there, quite frankly, risking their lives, only to find out that they weren't getting settled on this enhanced pricing for that time period. So just want to run it through the system, get it into our revenue management platform, and just check to make sure that things look the way that they're supposed to look, quite frankly. And I think it's times like these when you have that volatility or the market's moving, that's really important to have that visibility and insights into your revenue.
Yeah, and speaking of revenue, so one thing that I should clarify is that whatever hedge choices you made, financial hedge choices, that is definitely distinct from the prices that you would see on the production statements. But I'm glad you said revenue, because that's our vision here, is to be able to help you with revenue management all the way from negotiation with midstream, getting paid the way you're supposed to get paid, and then also taking any unnecessary risk off the table with financial hedging. Hey,
Absolutely.
last note. Yeah, last note about Max is not a special guest. He is part of the team here. So if anything that you'd like elaboration that you hear from Max here, further explanation, or dig deeper into what Aegis Physical can do, he's around.
I'm glad to be on board, and I think it's really cool now to be able to tie the physical space to the financial side. That's something that we never really dabbled in that space and knew enough about it to be dangerous, but to have the resources that he just brings to the table, and then being able to couple that with what we built on the physical side, it's a really, really unique offering, and something that I'm excited about the team, and excited to do more of these with you, Matt. I think we need to make it a more regular occurrence and get on here and chat it up about what's going on.
It's fantastic. I'm learning as we go. Well, hey, Max, thank you so much, and I guess we'll get back to Jay to finish up talking about oil.
Thanks, Matt.